Hello students, it's Mr. Weaver. Right now I'm going to show you how you might fill out this outline that I gave you, and I am going to use language of the discipline as my thinking tool, and the piece of literature that I'm looking at is The Wife's Story by Le Guin. So here's the outline, and so this is Mr. Weaver's example analyzing the wife's story. As you can see, for my introduction discussion point, which you'll see on your outline, I've decided I am going to have a discussion, basically where I'm writing down some thoughts that I have about how often do we question people giving us a message. That's what I'm going to talk about. How do we trust the messenger? Why do we inherently trust the messenger? And when do we have that happen in our lives? Do we consider the messenger's motives, the background, the biases of the messenger? Does it depend on who that messenger is, where that messenger comes from? And of course, that also applies to media, which I might bring up. Then, that would be in the introduction of my paper. Then I would lead into my thesis, which this is a working thesis as I write the actual paper. This might change here and there. But here's a thesis that might work. Ursula K. Le Guin uses vague epithets, deceptive settings, and ironic imagery to guide the reader into allegiance with the wife in the wife's story. The reader in turn questions, not abandons. He questions, see, I was still in the middle of writing this, his allegiance to the messenger. And so that's what I would try to prove. So what I would do then is in each paragraph, I would have different discussion points. And that's what you have in paragraphs. These are discussion points. You're leading the reader through a discussion of your idea as you're analyzing your piece of literature, in my case, the wife's story. So I would look at the epithets. An epithet is a word that either comes in front of to describe or replaces a character in a story. So, for instance, we don't know the name of the father, so the epithet father is given, husband is given, and there's some other epithets given. There's epithets given to the daughter and things like that. So how do those epithets, the fact that they are not specific but kind of vague, how does that lead to this kind of distancing of the reader from the reality of who the actual father is, that he's actually a wolf? And so I would talk about that, and here we have, so my discussion point is epithets bring the reader into a negative view of the wife's opposition, which is the father in the end of the story, seen as a negative, bad character. And I would have some quotes. The support is like, all right, what quotes do you have that I would bring this out? So the quotes would obviously be epithets. Then we have discussion point 2. The setting sounds dark, but it's actually light, which parallels the way we believe the dark about a person rather than the truth. So when a messenger comes and tells us some gossip about someone else, they are putting that person in the dark, when actually that person might be in the light. They might actually be sincere or good or be doing a good thing with a good motive, but because of the messenger seemingly putting that person in the dark, we believe the dark. And so in the story, when it's talking about the husband going out in the evening is actually the morning. It's actually the day, and the wolf is actually out in the middle of the day, and it's a human being in the light, which is not a bad thing. So, but we are led to believe it's a bad thing. And so that's how the setting does that, and it kind of parallels how we believe bad about people. And then so I would have some support about how when it's talking about the evening, it's actually talking about the day rather than the night, and the messenger, who is Le Guin, is deceiving us, and the wife is deceiving us. Next is that the imagery reinforces the bias that the father is no good. The smell, okay, that's a support, right? And so that would be me putting that support here. The absence and the description in the transformation, all of that, lots of support that this imagery reinforces that the father's no good. But do you realize, student, that he's turning into a man, like a person? And we would inherently say that people are, kind of good, and wolves, they try to hurt people, so they're not good. So here we have the wife giving us a negative view of the object of her derision, which is the father. And so we see that again. And so that's kind of the main discussion when it comes to the literary techniques. I talk about how there's suspense built here, and I added this. I could add that into my thesis, or maybe just continue the discussion saying that the suspense builds because of these literary devices. It builds this anxiety in me, the reader, about who the father is, about his motives, about the bad things that he's doing, about how the daughter is disgusted by him, and that really is kind of disturbing. And so what it does is it deflects any suspicion about the narrator herself, which is the wolf. We don't see anything bad with the wife, but really, the wife isn't so good in the end when she's killing the husband, which is a man. This lack of suspicion gives us total allegiance to the messenger. We totally believe the wife. We have no suspicions against the wife throughout this entire story until the very end, when the sister is literally taking the man and putting his throat in her jaws. Then we're like, ooh, maybe this isn't so good after all. And maybe this wife is being a little biased in the way that she's telling the story. And maybe I shouldn't be loving on how great the wife is. Maybe I should be defending the fact that this guy is being eaten by wolves. So that brings up this discussion. Some readers, when confronted with the truth, will feel a sense of regret that they believed the messenger. They hated the object of the messenger's story and somehow enjoyed the destruction of some other human being, which then, of course, brings up what happens in real life. What happens when a friend of yours starts talking bad about someone else? You start to believe it. What happens when the news starts talking horribly about a particular person? You start to believe it. But do you ever question the messenger? Do you ever question the bias in the media, the bias in the news, and say, have I listened to the other person's perspective? Or do I just believe the news because they're the ones reporting it? Just like I believe the wife because she's reporting the story. So that is an interesting application to this big idea that's in the story, that you can't always believe the messenger. That's the big idea. And so these literary techniques help to bring out that big idea. In conclusion, the literary techniques guide the reader to unquestioning allegiance to the messenger, the storyteller. When do we finally decide to reject the storyteller, the media, the messenger? So at what point when you're listening to someone else can you say, well, I reject what you're saying because I believe that you're not telling the truth? When do we listen to the other side? How do we know whom to believe? These are the big questions coming out of the story when you look at it through the thinking tool, language of the discipline, which is what I did. Now, there's lots of other things you could get out of the language of the discipline, but these are the ones that I found, and this is how I analyzed the story, which is your job in this particular assignment, is to analyze one of these stories in a deep way and try to understand it better and then bring out some hidden big idea that's in the story. And so I brought out not trusting or trusting the messenger too much in the way that I analyzed the story. Hopefully that helps you understand how you're going to fill out this outline to help you get ready to write your paper. Have a wonderful day.